Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. It's been a minute, but we're back. I hibernated for the winter, and I am super excited to have my friend, my fellow Big Bad Con staff member now. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Indrani Ganguly from Nonagon Dice, from Daisies and Dragons, from now a game designer. You're just all sorts of stuff. Indrani, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Wow, that's such a nice introduction. I
So,
appreciate that.
for those of you who don't know, Indrani is one of the driving forces. There are a lot of folks, but one of the driving forces behind Daisies and Dragons. We've talked about Daisies and Dragons on the show before, but just give folks a quick primer about, because nobody watches this crap. So let
No, hey. 2023 is a year where we own that the show is amazing and that people should be watching it if they aren't
well
already. Okay,
uh, uh,
Ezra, I'm holding you to this.
that's a lot of pressure. I
I'm gonna watch
prefer.
every single fucking episode, and anytime you say something mean about yourself or the show, I'm gonna fucking I don't know, come at you on Twitter.
So the true secret is I only self-deprecate to keep my raging ego in check because
I
nobody
get that.
loves me like I love me.
That makes me happy,
I am.
but still,
I can
you're.
get my wife in here to let you know just how little ego problems I have. But
I wouldn't
um,
be tripping. Daisies and
let
Dragons. That's right.
yeah,
Sorry, I already how long has it been? 2 seconds, and I've already derailed us. I love
I'm
it.
here for it. I'm here for it.
Um, yeah, I co-founded a community called Desis and Dragons. It is now India's largest TTRPG community. It's a community space not just for players and GMs, but also game designers and writers and artists and just like streamers and a lot of creative people from like across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and as well like other parts of the world. So it's this really collaborative, beautiful community that we've built. The goal for it initially was to start like having more people in the hobby in India because I always like to use this tidbit to put into perspective. When we started Desis and Dragons, the largest space around tabletop RPGs was a WhatsApp group with like some 70, 80 people in it, and that was the extent of it. Like, and everybody knew each other, kind of thing. Um, but now it's so much more different. We have like what over 1,300 people just on our Discord server. So it's been amazing watching it grow and like watching new people find their own interests and niches within the TTRPG sphere itself. So yeah,
There is
that's
so
Daisies and
much.
Dragons.
There's so much cool stuff happening in the streaming, game designing, creative space coming out of the Southeast Asia. The what is Aswana, or I can't remember the actual
Uh
pronunciation.
yeah, SA
Yeah,
both work, yeah.
yeah. Coming out of that region, there's just so much untapped that folks that are all of the sudden getting that, like, wait, I can do this. This is cool.
That's the thing that's really interesting to watch is because we've had all these incredible people come in who've started playing games, who've gone far beyond just like say the top echelon of like tabletop, like whatever those games take. They take up a lot of space in like I think Western TTRPG discourse, but like here in India we're just constantly, at least at Desis and Dragons, we're constantly like exploring a bunch of different TTRPGs, and like there's such a huge focus on exploring the breadth of what these kind of games can offer, and that's led to people wanting to creating their own. And a friend of mine, Ari, who's a moderator on Desis and Dragons, they constantly are running like game jams for like new people to come write their own games, and that's how I wrote my first game. They recently got an IGDN grant to finish their own PBTA based game. It's called Black Sun. And that just stemmed from like getting into the hobby and like, just finding this larger community and being like, oh shit, there's like, this can be viable. So that's always beautiful to watch, to see that process for a lot of people. So,
And it's exciting because new I used to do a segment for another podcast called build a bigger game table, because like
mm,
the game world is not pie. Like, if more people are doing it, there's not less pie for you. You know,
Yes.
the table can get bigger, and new people bring new and exciting ideas and new experiences. You know, GMing is so much drawing from things that you've read, things that you've seen or experienced. And when you have those different cultural experiences, it only kind of enriches and gives a new flavor to something that has been around for now decades.
Yeah. I mean, how and that goes like always, right? Like, how selfish would it be for me to think that everything I know and have experienced is the extent of what can be like what people can create from. So like, a lot of the times I will push myself to like go find ttrpgs from like, you know countries that I don't know much about, or like
Mm,
people I like, cultures I don't know much about, and be like, oh, I wonder like what are the like beats that they hit in their RPGs, and I wonder where that comes from. And the same goes for like, folks here from India, or from like Pakistan, or from, all the South Asian regions, because there's just, even like within my country or our countries, like, you go 30 miles and it's a completely different language, it's a completely different cuisine, it's a completely different like way of dressing, living, whatever that is. So like, just, there's so much to be explored. And yeah, it's exactly right, it's that, make a bigger table, because everything adds value.
yeah. Well, and
So
it must be so interesting. You know, you were just saying like you go 30 minutes and there's a different language. So there must be, even within your Discord, just a tremendous melting pot of different cultures, different languages, different, experiences.
yeah, it's wild to me. So I am multilingual. I speak a couple of different languages, and some not as well as others. But every now and then there'll be someone who'll pop into the server who'll be like, "Hi, I'm from, from Rourkela, which is a, part of like, uh, Odisha, right?" And they speak, mm, Uriya, and there'll be someone who'll be like, "Oh yeah, I speak Uriya, and if you're comfortable, I can run a game for you in Uriya." Or someone
Cool.
who'll be like, "Oh, I'm Telugu. I'd love to play with other people who speak Telugu because my English is not that great," or like, I just feel more comfortable
Mm.
communicating in this language, whatever, you know. And they'll be like, "Yes, I speak Telugu. Let me run a game for you." Like, I know there's like servers that have spawned off like from Desis and Dragons, of like, smaller communities, like, oh, we're just a bunch of writers, let's make our own little space. And that's great. I'm happy to see,
Yeah.
people build their own spaces that they can shape exactly the way they want. That makes me very, very fucking happy. Can I curse on this?
Nobody
I
watches.
can curse. No.
Go to
Hey,
town. Go to town.
incorrect, because I'm gonna watch every single episode that
Eh,
comes out, and then your statement will be factually incorrect, and I'll be like,
man.
actually, anytime you say that.
Uh,
So watch
it's
yourself,
funny because
Ezra.
I don't swear. The only,
Oh, you
in
don't?
fact, the only time I do swear is when I'm GMing. If like if one of the
The
NPCs would
characters you're
swear,
embodying
yeah.
someone?
And there's this weird like out of body thing where I'm like, what did I just say the F word? Whoa, because I used to be an elementary school teacher,
Oh, that makes
and
sense.
so like now I used to joke like I could drop a hammer on my toe and I'd say fudge.
Really?
But the
That's
kids totally like I'd say fudge. They go, we know what you mean.
I mean, yeah. Who's fooling? I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's
10-year-old.
well, and America, we're all messed up. We have our weird Puritan like stuff.
It's I I remember my first encounter with the F word. And what a big deal it had
This
been.
should be a new podcast. Just ask people the first time they encountered the F
A
word.
curse word. Yes. Um, do you want me to tell you that story? We're gonna
Please,
get distracted
now
with
you
it.
have
Okay, so
to.
yeah, so I I think was in, say, maybe like fifth or sixth grade. Doesn't matter, right? I don't know how old that makes me, but that's how old I was.
That would be, I
Um,
think, 11 or 12 here.
yeah. No, no, no. It's not 11 or 12. I was at least like 9 or 10 maybe, because I know by the
Oh,
time I was 11 I was on the internet and I was cursing. So it had to be before 11 for sure. Um, but every so I would go to school and come back from school on a school bus, and I was at a yeah, I was coming back from school and it was raining. So we have monsoon season. So we have like 3 months in a year where it just rains. And it was raining. And what happens when it rains is that the glass, like the windows, they all get like condensation on them, right? So there were these 10th graders and 11th graders who always, they're so cool. They only sit at the, like all the way at the back, right? And I had walked onto the bus and I was, I don't know what, whatever grade, right? And there's no space in the front, so I walked all the way to the back, and these 10th graders were like laughing to themselves, thinking they're so cool, and they were like writing FUCK on like on the condensed like windows, and I was like, what is that? And I don't know what that means. And they looked at me and they're like, oh, and these were like dudes who were like who would bully little girls. They're like, oh, the little piglet is here. And they just started saying stupid shit to me. And I was like, whatever. I walked away. And I got home. I was so curious. I pulled out my dictionary and I went through it and I was like, okay, F you. Okay. Oh, that doesn't seem very appropriate to say. And because these guys were bullies and I was a little asshole kid, I went to the headmistress
Oh man, nice. You
and
called him
I
out.
told her that
You
these
named names.
guys who called me little piglet were saying this word, but took my dictionary with me.
My virginal ears.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember the headmistress just like cringing and feeling so like bad in that moment. Um, and I'm pretty sure that guy got suspended for 3 days. This is not a joke. This is a true fucking story because when he came back, he was like, "You, I know what you did," and I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Who? What? It's
How was your
interesting.
vacation?
My version of that story um, is about the first time I heard one of my students swear. Because
Ooh,
are you familiar with the term code switching?
yes,
Yeah. So
I do it
I
a lot.
taught. Yeah.
So yeah.
So I taught at a 98% African American black school in New
Mhm,
Orleans, Louisiana. It was, these kids were in the ninth ward, so in Gentilly, in
mhm,
quite a neighborhood. And so
yeah.
I, during class, these kids were, they weren't like speaking in English accents or anything, but they were definitely like code switching and not being their a natural self. And then after school, myself and one of the fourth grade teachers had a bet. If any two kids could beat us in basketball, we would buy them pizza. And so we started playing basketball with these kids. And one day, one of my kids, one of the sixth graders, comes in, and they gave us a good game. And I at one point cheated a little bit because I was worried about loot because I like so competitiveness makes you do stupid things.
Yes.
And so, I didn't throw an elbow at the kid, but I gave him a good bump. And
Right.
he like backed up. He's like, "Fuck," and then he goes, "Sorry, Mr. Denny." Like he
Oh, that's so
immediately, like, it was
funny.
I'd never seen it like happen like that before. And I was like, "Hey, no, it's okay. We're out here. That's cool. You know, you can do that." But
I love it.
that seeing that kind of code switching, that's a world that I mean, you could say that I'm doing that by not swearing. Like I'm code
Mhm.
switching myself, but I live in a world of privilege, so I
I
I need
mean,
to recognize that.
you valid, but also I love that story because um I feel like it shows also like a level of respect from these kids for, their teachers in the
For
space. I
cheating.
don't know if that's necessarily true, but like it seems, yeah, it's a sweet story that he was
It's
like, oh,
it was a fun thing, and it was a weird time. But like that is an example of like that moment of code switching is something that I filed away and I have used when I've run NPCs and stuff because lived experience is and this sorry I'm a theater major, so I get into like
I
theater talk
love
all the
that.
time. But
Please.
lived experience informs your character work.
Right.
And if if you are trying to portray a character that is of a different ilk than you know um always make sure that you are respectful of the culture and you're not caricaturing. That's
Hmm.
I have a rule that I came out, which is I only do white accents. I'll make fun of any white accent, but I'm not going to do any other accent. That is my um,
Valid. Yeah.
but like but you can take that experience that you've had and kind of use it to infuse the character.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me because that's usually how I approach like playing characters in like when I'm playing NPCs or playing a character who's from, I don't know, a culture that is draws from a culture that is unfamiliar to me. So yeah, I'd be like, I won't do any, and I think that's a basic like um courtesy that any person or player should provide. Like if there's like professional, I don't know,
I mean,
actors who just do accents all the time, great. But if you're not,
yeah,
you know, like,
especially if it is a different culture. Like
yes,
that's a whole nother layer. Like I'll make fun
yeah,
of the British, all the time and mock their accents, but
yeah,
I would feel less comfortable. So for instance, I was just thinking about this. I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu, and normally it's 1920s America. It's in my wheels. Okay, say what are we gonna do here? Huh? But I recently ran their latest campaign, Children of Fear, that is completely based in the Silk Road. So China, Tibet, India.
right,
And as I was playing that, as I was running that, I was super conscious of like, you know, this is a world I don't live in.
yeah,
And then what I just thought of as you were talking is like that's every other Call of Cthulhu module for you. Like
correct.
Children of Fear is the most relatable one for you because it's of your cult. It's and of course you would look at it and go like, oh Jesus, what are they? Oh no.
I haven't read it yet, but now I'm in, like I've been. I think I'll be playing Call
Supposedly,
of Cthulhu
so it
soon. So
seemed pretty good. Like
okay,
from my you know trying to be slightly sensitive eyes. As I read
yeah,
it, they had cultural consultants, which is good. And they made great. They made big. They did a lot of historical work in it, which I appreciated. And talking about,
that's always nice to know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it
Um.
was a complicated time in the history for that whole region, and
Mhm.
especially for six white people, traipsing around. I made sure to make the several colonialism points, and who's the bad guy here, really? That sort of.
Yeah. I always. It's always a fun narrative seeing stuff like that happen in like role playing games because there is this like heroism sort of like trope, right? Like you are saviors, you're coming in, you're saving this place. And like I have indulged in that fantasy myself when I play tabletop RPGs. Like
Yeah,
me and my band of adventurers, what's your problem? We're here to fix it. And we've some of the games I've played, like specifically ones with Shubham, like delve into that uncomfortable territory of like, are you really helping?
yeah.
Or like what's like
That's
is it
kind of
who
the
is this for?
high
Yeah.
fantasy, low fantasy. I'm always a low fantasy person.
Same.
I like complications and grunge, and if you have a game where I can give somebody a disease, I'm on board. That is one
Oh
of my
my
favorite.
god.
But that's an interesting, that high
Change.
fantasy.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to come back to the Silk Road one being more familiar to me,
Mhm.
and like every sort of like European or Western fantasy thing being like, oh, this is not what
Right.
I'm used to, sort of thing. And what's interesting, and I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, is that like when I delved into it, it always felt familiar for a couple of reasons because so much of like Western export ends up in our countries as like things that we
Like
consume.
movies
And
and
it's not a two-way street. It's very much a one-way like um thing that happens, like for example, and surely like there's a level of privilege that I have to be able to like have access to, say, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings growing up. So
right.
when I hear elves and dwarves, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And I know people who have played TTRPGs and been like, oh, what, like, walk me through what that even looks like, like these preconceived notions
Right.
of what fantasy looks like isn't built in on people who haven't willingly or unwillingly, due to circumstance, not been able to consume Western exports. So that's like a fascinating thing, right? Because um, so much of what we consume here in India, including news, fascinatingly enough, like I know far too much about American politics than I need to. You know what I mean? And um,
That does
so
not go the other way, I'll tell you that.
it does not go the other.
Yeah.
I am aware of it, and like sometimes I make an active effort when I see like, oh, breaking news, and like I don't know, fucking Reddit or something when I'm scrolling at 4 a.m. and it's like this senator from this state. I'm like, I don't care. I'm gonna
Yeah,
keep
that's the
moving.
right choice.
Yeah, yeah,
We're all
um,
doing the same thing usually.
yeah. I that I appreciate knowing that, but that's a little like I think fascinating change.
Yeah,
Like for me, all of these things felt at least somewhat like, yeah, I get it. Like it's not so
right.
unfamiliar.
You have a shorthand at least because of
Yeah,
Western media and that sort of thing. Yeah, that is interesting because we don't really have that. Like, short
right.
of um you know book reading a book on Indian mythology or something, like there's a there's this book on Greek mythology that like every kid in America in the 80s read. And uh it was this this one, it was called, oh god, there was this one family that wrote these books, and it was like a picture book. And so every kid in the 80s loves the Greek gods because of this like one book, and I was always like, I wish they'd done some different method. I think they did Greek and Norse, and that was it.
That those I love how accessible, like I also grew up loving Greek and Norse mythologies, right? It started with, I think, Percy Jackson. And then I was like, oh, I want to know more about Greek gods. So, like, I got these comics that were just stories from the Greek
Ah,
gods. And then I got the Neil Gaiman books about Norse mythology. And, like,
right,
that's sort of like
American
where,
gods and that. Yeah.
not American gods. He
Oh no,
just
he
has a
wrote.
book
You're right.
called Norse mythology, and
Right.
it's literally stories from like the poetic and the prose edda, and written in
I
a
I
like
forgot
in a
about that. I haven't read that. I got to make a note of that.
it's really good. In fact, they actually came out with like this beautifully beautifully illustrated comic version of like a graphic novel version of his Norse mythology book, and my partner got it as a gift for me, and it just, oh my god, it is so good. I highly recommend.
That's
um
awesome.
yeah, and
I'm
again, it's that one way thing, right? Like where I grew up learning about these and reading about these, where it wasn't a,
It was. I'm sorry. I was just learning out. It was called the all these books of Delaire's Book of Norse Myths, and
oh,
they had
I
one
love
for
that
Greek,
art.
and like they were like that was some of my earliest storytelling, was like using those to fake games out, and those. But so actually, that's a great. How did you get your start GMing?
I have been fortunate enough to have forever GMs in my life
Mm,
who, out of choice, just enjoy GMing. So, not until much later, I think. I used to go to a convention that would happen here. You know, our friends at Panic Not, they were at a Big Bad Con
yeah,
panel, Big Bad Online panel with us last year. They did a convention in Mumbai, which was specifically for Dungeons and Dragons. It was like, come, we'll teach you how to play the game.
is
And
this
it was
in
like
like the early 2000s? When is
no,
this?
no, no, no. Early 2000s, I was a baby.
Oh,
It was
well, now I don't like this game. I don't.
so I was born in the year 2000. So,
Oh,
so
ah,
um, no. Well, it
that's
was,
all
I
the
think.
time we have.
All right, it was nice knowing you, Ezra. Next time I see you at Big Bad Call, you'll be like, okay, walk away.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so I think it was like, gosh, it was, I don't know, 2015, 2016, maybe. We stopped, I mean, they stopped doing it during the pandemic, and I
Mhm.
think things are kicking back up. I'm gonna bother them after this week, like, when's the next one? But um so that's where I had already become familiar with D&D by this point, so I went to the convention being like, "Holy shit, there's other people who play. Let me go meet them." And this was a precursor to me being added to the aforementioned WhatsApp group with
Right,
80
right.
people. But
So you're
when I
going to
got
a
there,
convention as like a 15-year-old.
yeah, well, 15 or 16, I doesn't really matter. Yeah, I was fairly self-sufficient by that point in terms of like just being able
I
to
was an
travel.
idiot when I went to a gaming convention. I went to DundraCon, which is like a old, super old school convention out here in 1980. When I was like,
What was that? Sorry.
it was, I think it was 86. And
Oh,
I
okay.
think I
Yeah.
was 15 and I ran the worst game ever run. Uh, but my brother and I went and we didn't have a room. And so we slept in the anime room. We like brought like 3 bags of food and we just like slept.
Wow.
It was not a great, but like so I ran a game called Return to the Castle of No Return, and all it was 4 hours of terrible jokes,
That's so funny.
and like and then a D&D fight would break out, and
Do you
like,
remember one of the jokes?
oh man, there was a stupid puzzle. You had to go through this labyrinth, and
Mhm.
the key to it was there was some riddle like um uh left is right, right is wrong, what is left? And like, so the idea was you had to go left every time in this
Mhm.
labyrinth. And
Mhm.
and at the end, and I was just making crap up. And at the end, this guy, probably in his 20s, but to me, he was like an adult. He comes up
Right.
with, that was just brilliant, man. And the way that you like brought in all these like references from different things, I'm like, yeah, I sure did.
I love that.
It
That's
was,
also, to be fair, that sounds like a very legit puzzle. I don't know
it was
what the
terrible.
terrible
The whole
joke
thing.
is.
I mean, it was just so like, what was the joke? The jokes were like, um, there was a oh god, there was a it wasn't it wasn't a gelatinous cube. It was a oh god, there was some. It was made of like it was made of like uh not it wasn't made of gelatin. It was made of like some like it was made of like parfait. It was like a yogurt parfait
Oh,
thing, and the only way you could beat it was by eating it.
that's
And like
great.
the player,
No,
like, I just was all these dumb ideas. It was,
I
but
love it.
the only
No, no,
good
no.
thing I did in that, I did one good thing, which is I used my favorite D&D monster. I don't even know if they're still in D&D, but I used to love Ogre Magi, who were one of my
I have no
favorite
idea what that
monsters
is.
because they could polymorph. And so I had this Ogre Magi who pretended to be like the stupid construct was they were in a contest and they had to do all this stuff and blah blah blah. But so this Ogre Magi pretended to be one of the contestants, and he like took over one of the contestants and like made and killed him and took his place. And the only reason that they knew this, and one of the only good things that I did in this module was I set up from the beginning that this character had like a bad, he was allergic to one of the PCs, and every time he was around the and like at the end, the clue that he was the bad guy was that he didn't have that problem when he was around the guy, and I was like so proud of that, and nobody got it.
Well, if they're watching, and I'm sure they are,
I
now
doubt
they
it.
know. Now
But
they
that,
know.
that's interesting because that brought up something that I run into a lot, and something that, which is, I like to indicate a lot of stuff in my portrayal. So like, of NPCs and that sort of thing. And then somebody goes, "Can I make an insight roll to see if they're lying?" And and part of me's like, let's role play that out. But then, you know, I had a player who one time said, um, I have a really good insight skill, but I don't have a good insight skill. So can I make the roll? And I was like, oh yeah. Not everybody's going to be like, what? No, I'm not lying. That might not
Yeah.
give them the, and, so, this, he didn't say this, but I said it for him. I'm like, oh yeah, you have the skill for a reason,
Yeah.
and much more sort of want to make it organic and all this stuff. And
I think that's a constant like push and pull between like using the mechanical abilities that you have and sort of leaning into like the social element of it, where you're watching body language, where you're listening for cues, where you're, trying to remember inconsistencies and whatnot. And I see that sort of disparity between um physical attributes and mental attributes often. Like a
ooh,
charismatic character need, like if your player isn't very charismatic, playing a charismatic character feels far more daunting than like me, who's not very healthy, playing a like barbarian with like
right,
big muscles. And like I don't need to like do anything besides the mechanical element of it, and obviously like the storytelling element of it. Whereas
right.
I've often noticed with like high end, high vis, or like high charisma classes that you kind of need to embody that element just as a human being, or as a person, or as like to be able to like effectively meet people's expectations of what that like looks like. um and I love playing high end classes. Like I'm a wizard main forever, and I have no inhibitions about it. I've become that asshole where Shubham, my GM, whenever he runs games, if he'll throw a puzzle at us, he'll get half a sentence in, and I will solve it, and he'll be like, "Well, fuck you, Indrani."
You know,
Uh,
that's interesting. Have you ever in when you were GMing, have you ever given your players puzzles?
yeah. So my sort of rule of thumb for puzzles is that if if by not solving it the game ends, that's a bad puzzle
Yeah.
for me. Like I'm like, there will be people who are like, I just want to brute force my way through it, or I'm
Yeah.
going to look for an alternative because puzzles are not my thing. And that's fine. As long as I have those avenues open to people, great. I never really answered the when did I start GMing thing,
Right, right,
and
sorry.
quickly, it was these like conventions. They were like, "Oh, you already play D&D, so instead of just like joining a table and playing, would you be interested in running games so that like we can get complete newbies to try it out? We need more GMs than we do players, as is always the case." So I was like, "Yes, I will GM." And anytime I go to the convention, I try to GM for them, and that's how it started.
So you're
Um,
wait, was that the first game you ran? Was that a convention?
yeah, it was.
Wow, that's
And
impressive.
I should lower your expectations of what I mean when I say convention. I mean like a 6 hour event on a Sunday evening.
That counts.
That's
That counts.
yeah, yeah.
You know, that if
Um
there were like players at the table that you
yes.
didn't know and you were running a game for them, that's a baptism by fire, man.
I weirdly enough like think that's easier for me than to run games for people I know, because if it's someone I don't know, then I'm like, I don't know what you're interested in, and what you love and what you don't. And I mean, I'll get a read on it as we play, but if it's a friend, I am way more stressed out, because I'm like, you hate this, you hate everything that's coming out of my mouth, and you're not going to be friends with me anymore. And so I find it easier to GM for
That's
strangers.
fascinating to me, huh?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I don't mind running, but I have found that minus Big Bad Con, which is its own, like if I run a game of Big Bad Con, I know every single person at that table is going to be fantastic. But if I run a game at DunderCon, I'm going to have two fantastic players, two okay players, and then two randos that who knows.
yeah. The wild
And I
cards.
have to be ready for that. And that totally changes how I approach things. And sort of I sort of go in with my shields up, being like, okay, who's the rando? Who's gonna like, who's gonna spray Febreze all over themselves all throughout the game or something like that. There's gonna be something.
Yeah.
Um, and but I mean, mini cons kind of you self-select a little more, like the thing you were at. That makes a difference. Um, so these mini cons you go to, were you running like your own stories? Did they have a module they handed you?
No, I mean they did have modules, but I was like, I'll wing it. The very first time I GM'd, it was like a, yeah, I have these basic beats that I know I can hit, and we'll just go with it. I just
That's
like looked up the
fantastic.
stat blocks for I remember what it was. It was a story about um it's classic, right? It's not anything revolutionary. It was just like, oh, you arrive at this village or a town, I think it was, where people all seem a little low, and you walk into a tavern and you see the sheriff who's just like, having a bunch of drinks in front of him, and he's very upset, and you walk over and like they're like, oh, what's wrong with you, dude? And he's like, oh, a bunch of kids have gone missing, and we like me and my employees were trying to look for these kids, but we just cannot find them, and we don't know what's going on, and another one went missing this morning. um and obviously that's the hook, right? Like,
Yeah,
help these kids, like help find these kids. Yeah, so they go and they look around, and like the farms on the outskirts of like the village, like things are rotting, and they're like, oh, I wonder where this magic leads to, da 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 da. And like, turns out it's an evil hag who has a little alcove and like deep in the forest on the outskirts, and she's using kids to like, I don't, it was like a whole thing, but it was like very traditional, like, here's the quest. Here are a few clues. Here's the monster. Defeat it. Free the kids. Great job. Well done. Um,
but I mean that is a great like 4 hour story. That's like
yeah, it's so straightforward that now when I look back at it, I'm like, oh, where's the intrigue? Where are the memorable NPCs? Where's like, you know, the moral quandary. I don't know. It was good. And I think I ran that. Like, that became my crutch adventure. Like, anytime it's
right.
like, oh, here's a bunch of like random people who've never played D&D. I was like, I have something for you. I will look for something better. But if I can't find it in time, I still got you.
Let's roll some dice.
Yeah, let's just roll some dice. One of my best friends today, his name is Rohan. He's a part of like this my little friend group now. I met him at Panic Nuts convention while running this game for him, and bless his soul, I don't think he played D&D after
He
that.
wanted different games.
Yeah, he was like, I went because like, I don't know, my friends wanted to go and I was just hanging out with them, and he's more of like a video game kind of person, which is valid. But he thinks like a gamer, like a video games person. So I explained what a ritual spell was to him. He was playing, I think, a cleric of some sort. And I was like, oh yeah, this one, if you take 10 minutes or 11 minutes, you can just cast it and not use up your resources. And then he had this look in his eyes, like, so I can do that. And I was like, yeah. And then every
He's like, do I
spell,
have 11
every
minutes?
single, he's like, is this a ritual spell? I'm like, no, but now it is. He's like, okay, cool. I'm gonna take 10 minutes, guys. Can we all wait?
He should have played a
Ev-
warlock. He could have just, that's
I
the ultimate video game one. You're just zap, 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 zap.
yep. But bless
That
his soul.
I mean, so like I'm fascinated by this just you just ran an off the cuff adventure for the very first time you ran at a convention. I think that's awesome. That's outstanding.
I didn't
And
really
so
think about it as like a thing to be, I guess, like, I don't know, proud of, but I guess, yeah.
and so and did you keep running after that, or because you said you've had forever GMs and stuff. So
Yeah, I did. So anytime I go to the convention, I'm probably always running a game. I haven't gone in a while, but on Desis and Dragons, we have this like constant flow of like GMs running their games and people signing up, and occasionally I have been known to put a few calls up of my own. The last game I facilitated was for the Queen. I didn't really talk in it. I just
nice.
like
That's
let
great.
people play it. And it's a game I learned about at Big Bad Con. Shout out to Spencer Stark for introducing me to For the Queen. Um, I've been trying to run like non D&D games because I think there's not an oversaturation, but there's like a lot of people who run D&D, and I'm happy for that because like it helps people get into the hobby. And then what I try to do with like my time whenever I can run games is try out different systems. So like
Mhm.
when Yuzeba's Bed and Breakfast was announced, they have an Ashcan out. I was like, fuck yeah, let me run some Yuzeba's. And so that's something I try to look for stuff that like try to fill I see myself as someone who's like the fill, like the support character. It's like, okay, so we have D&D covered, we have Starfighter covered, we have, I don't know, Wander Home covered. Let's see what else I can like bring to the table that serves a new niche or allows people to try new things out. So that's kind of the stuff that I find myself GMing or facilitating or whatever that is. My next goal is dialect. I am
Oh
very interested in
man,
running dialect.
it is super cool. It is,
I picked up the copy at Big Bad,
yeah,
and
it is super
yeah.
cool. It is I I found I haven't run it. I've only read it.
Mhm.
But I was like trying to figure out how I would like I couldn't find my entry into it, and like you sort of get a style
Yeah,
as you're GMing, and I am definitely not a it's funny that I run mainly horror games because I'm a comedy GM. I
right,
run, I my games are about the absurdity of life. And
right.
like
And horror,
with
I think, leans perfectly well into that.
it does, yeah, yeah, and I mean, it can, it can be nice. It can be a nice sort of juxtaposition, but mainly that's also because of the players. I
Right.
play with the folks that I play with are just unhinged and silly, and I always know that somebody's going to do something crazy, and I'm just prepared for it. But like, and usually it leads to buildings burning down. But
They need
one of the
therapy.
reasons that I like to run real world games is that there's this there's an understanding that there is law enforcement in this world. And so
Mhm.
like my players are not murder hobos
Yeah.
because
There's
murdering
consequence to that.
someone is a thing, and it will I've told the story before, but I ran at Gen Con. The one time I went to Gen Con, I ran Call of Cthulhu for Chaosium, and that it was a standard scenario, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll run this 3 times. And the 3 times I ran it, the very first time I ran it was with this group of people I'd never met before, didn't know, and they were totally down to go weird places. Like that game, we just threw the module away. And like halfway through the module, it became clear that one of the players was actually the big bad guy and had been hypnotizing one of the other, like, and they were just coming up, and I'm just like, yes, this is awesome. Screw this story. This is much better, you know. And then the second group were literal murder hobos. They like like in the very beginning of the game, they were like, we can't let the police know what they're doing. And I actually had to say, you are the police.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
and
Oh no.
it was a whole thing. But that weird, that's part of the con thing, is you never know what's going to be at your table,
Yep.
and um are, safety tools are a big piece in the news right now, in the gaming news, let's say. But I'm curious how, because Days and Dragons, those are all online games, right? All,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
do you have kind of codified safety tools for Daisies and Dragons,
Yeah.
and how are those kind of targeted for online games?
So what we realized early on is that we can't, even if we have an expanded team of moderators, it's not something we can't go into every single game and like listen in and make sure like everyone's okay. So there is a little bit of an honor system in the sense that we are trusting you with this space, and these are things we need you to do if you're going to use our space. um and people, thank goodness, have been good about it, and the ones who haven't have been, like, we've been notified of it and
Right.
whatnot. But here's how we handle safety tools. What we do is that we have like this template on our server. So like there's a specific channel with this, like, if you want to run games, here's how. And it's this template where you talk about the game, you give the content warnings for the game, you specify which safety tools you are going to use. And we have a whole channel which like has all the safety tool resources, where like if you're not familiar with what it
Mm,
is, look at it, read it, pick the ones that make sense to you and that are most um that are like that ones that you can implement, and use those in your games. And if we see games that don't specify safety tools, for example, we're like, hey, we can't like have this post up, so we're going to delete it, put it back up when you can. Here's like the original text. And that's sort of what we try to do. And we whenever we have people who come in, so Stranger Things, when it came out, we had a huge influx of people because like some influencers in India knew about Daisies and Dragons, and they're like, oh, if you like Stranger Things, check out Daisies and Dragons. It was very nice of them to do that. Now, they'd played like some game with us on our stream before.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so when all these people came in, they were like, hey, so where do I even get started? And we did like this introduction to D&D thing, except it was like 30 minutes of introduction to D&D and then 40 minutes or like 50 minutes of talking about, so D&D is high fantasy, but if you want to play all of these other genres, here are a bunch of different games. And like making sure that we didn't fall into that trap of like D&D being like big
Mm,
the only thing that people
right.
knew about or cared about. um but even in that, right, we spent like the first, before we ran like started talking about the games, we were like, hey, so because of like just the social contract that you enter when you play these kind of games, you need to be mindful of like, just the whole safety tools spiel, and like just talked about it and why it was important. And again, we created like a kit where it was like, here are a bunch of different games that you can like, play on the server. Here's all the safety tools you need. So basically the goal is to constantly equip people with the knowledge and tools they need for safety tools, and make it the norm in the community space, right? So that's kind of what our goal often is. And I'd be lying if I said that there weren't issues. Like sometimes people will end a game and they'll be like, oh, by the way, the GM or one of the players didn't really respect this line or this whale. And then it becomes like a, okay, how do we handle that? Was it like a malicious thing, or was it like a general misunderstanding? Like, that human to human interaction, what was
Mm,
your read of it? Like, not every person who fucks up is doing it because, I don't know, they're trying to like be some edgelord,
right.
but they might just have like not fully grasped the situation. And we'll talk to them. We'll be like, hey, so we heard about the game you played. We hope you had fun, but some folks had concerns about, and just like making sure we're being amicable but stern whenever we need to.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's led to people being like, oh fuck you, don't tell me what I can do or not. And we're like, okay, bye.
Yeah, this
Go
is not
find
the
it. Yeah.
community for
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and
Please leave.
that's
Yeah.
the power that I want to rephrase that. That is the benefit of being a sort of at will community, is like you're agreeing
Yeah.
as part of this community to that these are important, that these things are important to everybody, and
Yeah.
that we all are in different places, and so having that agreement means that you can say, look, if this isn't the place for you, it's not the place for you,
100%. Do what you need to do, but not here.
yeah.
Like, and that's been a big important element of just building Daisies and Dragons out, is making sure that there are a few things that we value in a community that we cannot ever compromise on. And there have been like, people and times where that is challenged, and we have to just like stick to our guns. Like, for example, Daisies and Dragons is very, like, it's a choice we make every day to be like, oh, this is a queer friendly space, this is a space for minorities within South Asia and within India as well, right? Like, there's a bunch of different factors at play when it comes to like privilege, even within
Yeah,
India,
I mean,
right?
and
And
culturally, class,
religious, class,
religiously, yeah.
caste, like, all of these
Oh
things,
my gosh,
right?
past, I hadn't even thought, wow, that
Yeah.
was a whole different.
And yeah, exactly. So like, we've had like people who've been like, oh, why do you need pronoun bots on the server? You're putting, I don't know, gender identity before games. And I'm like, you know what? Bad opinion, leave. and
Yeah,
and and yeah, so like, that's, it's true, like, because in a way running a community is just making sure that like the social contract that has been agreed upon, I love using that word, social contract. I
it's
think such a
fantastic.
great term to really sort of put into words what that like is that you're agreeing by being a part of the space to follow these things just so that you have a good experience and everybody else does as well.
Yeah,
And if your enjoyment impedes someone else's enjoyment of the space, and you're the one breaking said contract in doing so, This is
Yeah.
not the space for you.
Yeah.
Like, respectfully or not, leave. Like, we
Right.
like, you know.
Well, and
um
that's a challenging part of running a community like that,
yeah,
is that, there's kind of an inflection point of like, when you have 300 people in a community, everybody's like, yeah, this is awesome, kumbaya. And then it's 500, and all of a sudden, you're like, hey, how'd that guy get in here? What is,
yep,
and but as you sort of become larger, it becomes harder and harder to kind of entrance exam those people out, and in fairness, the many of the bad actors kind of lie to get in and then
yeah.
cause trouble,
And then they show
luckily.
themselves like very
Yeah,
soon, like,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, luckily that in my experience, that's pretty limited hope, and that is the hope that you would have it. So you not only run help run Daisies and Dragons, you also make incredible dice. I was lucky enough to get some of Indrani's dice. This is my personal favorite.
Oh,
That one, I love that.
love that one.
And at Big Bad Con, you let us paint them, which is why, three of them look great, and one of them needs some help. I think I didn't do this one so well, but I am fascinated by the actual construction of these dice, because I've been rolling these now, and they roll quite nicely. Um,
Thank
and they're so this is resin, is that?
Yes, it's epoxy resin. That's right. Most of them are. I don't know if the last one is epoxy resin or not. Does it feel like the same to the other ones?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, then it's epoxy resin because I use like some other materials occasionally, but that's
And,
resin.
and so you have molds, I'm guessing, that you pour them in.
Yeah, I can walk you through like the
Yeah, I'd
process
love
in
to. I'm
30 minutes.
fascinated by this.
Yeah. So, how familiar are you with like just general manufacturing? Because I don't want to over explain things that.
Assume I'm an idiot,
Okay.
and
Very hard to
you'll
do,
never
but
go
I will try.
wrong.
Okay, so in order to build a mold, you need an object to mold in the first place. Now, what? How? So the first step of the process is to create designs that object because my dice they have their own, like the D20 has its own logo, it's a specific
Right.
font, it's a specific size, right? So I first designed the STL, the object files for the dice. So like it was on a computer, I used applications to make it. Great. Then I 3D printed it on a resin printer. There are two general kinds of 3D printers. There's the FDM printer, which is the more like traditional one, with that big
The
spool of like
plastic
what looks,
tool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So that's PLA, and that it's great for like bigger projects because you can create bigger things. It's more cost effective and it's faster. But it doesn't hold as much detail as this other option, which is resin printing. And the way a resin printer works is that you pour liquid resin into like a container. There's a UV light underneath that container, and there's a platform that dips into it. And the UV light, layer by layer. So think of a 3D object as a bunch of 2D objects sliced. So each layer is a tiny slice. So slice by slice, it builds and builds and builds into like a full object, right? So on a
Now
resin
this is just
printer,
for the molds.
this is just for like the masters that
Okay.
will eventually be used to make the molds. So 3D print on a resin printer, but when you print something, they often have layer lines on it there. So if you look at your dice, and the ones you probably have are not my they're
We got
from my
seconds.
excess
We
file.
got
Yeah.
factory seconds.
Yes. Listen, okay, I was like, I don't know what to do with these. People will paint them. Great.
They will.
But there's a level of gloss to them, I'm assuming. Like they're shiny, you can see
Oh
through
yeah.
them.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can.
um yeah, so that's because every single face has been polished to that degree. So it starts off as completely matte, right? So it's like multiple stages of sanding and polishing and processing to get it to that point. Once it's at that shiny point, once it's at that shiny point, then I use silicone to make the molds, right? So these become the masters from which all the other dice will be made. My masters are so precious to me. I keep them in like a pelican case. just so nothing happens to them. Because it's a humongous like effort to like
I
just make
imagine, yeah, to get
them.
them that shiny. Now,
Yep.
are the molds one use or
So the molds are degradable. So silicone over time will degrade, and I'm sure some of your dice will not be as shiny as some other ones, or will have some scuffs on them. And that's because as you're constantly like pushing and pulling the mold to like demold dice from it or whatever, what you're doing is you're stressing the mold out. So like a rubber band, for example, it's fairly elastic, but if you keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it, eventually it will snap, right?
yeah,
And even if it doesn't snap, if you stretch it for a long time and then you like release the tension, you'll see that it has lost elasticity or it's become brittle over time, whatever, right? So like similarly, silicone will degrade over time. So from one batch of molds, I usually get like 20 to 30 sets of dice out of them.
wow.
And then I need to go and make fresh molds, but not the masters. Once I've made the masters, I just need to take care of them
Mm.
and
Keep them
use the same.
in that hermetically sealed box.
Ah, exactly. Um, Once the molds are made, I use epoxy resin to, now's when the fun stuff happens. So like the color and the inclusions and like all of that stuff goes into said
So, like,
molds.
for this one, like multicolored, or
Yes.
like this has two different shades in it that you
Uh-huh.
can kind of see. In this one, there's like a clear line of demarcation of like the darker and the lighter kind of. Is this
Yeah.
just like dropping? Like how do you make the swirls and
So there's a bunch of different techniques people employ to like get different designs. So if you pick up the white and clear, your favorite one, you see that there's these tendrils on them. I'm sure, like, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but like the white has these tendril like
yeah?
portions. That's a different method than the one in the other one. So sometimes you tint the resin and you pour the resin into the mold. Sometimes you pour clear resin into the mold and you drop like tint into the mold itself, which the weight of the pigment will like pull it down in these like
Huh.
striations. So
So
there's a
are these both pigment, the red and the white?
so the red is actually a flower. It's a little red rose that's sitting inside clear resin. And one of the reasons
Holy
that
cow, it is.
yeah,
Didn't even
yeah,
notice that.
exactly. And that was one of the reasons it ended up in the factory second pile, is because I was like, well, I know it's a rose, but unless I point it out to people, I don't think they're gonna get it. Um, Fun fact behind that one. Do you know Anjali Bhimani?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
She was
yeah,
at
so
yeah.
Anjali Didi is great. I love her. But she wanted me to make her some dice, and I was like, okay, but what kind of dice? And she's like, let's make Anjali dice. And I was like, yes. What does that look like? And she was like, she told me this beautiful story about like the best day of her life, which was her wedding day, and how there were like all these roses and gold, and like she talked about these colors, and I was like, cool, I can work with that. And the set that I gave her took me, I think, 4 attempts, 4 different
Wow.
pours to get it to the vision that I had in mind and that she had in mind. And all the ones before that ended up in my seconds pile because I was like, this is cute. It's just not what I want. And that's often what is the criteria for, like, it can be a good looking die. If it's just not what I want it to look like, I get upset at it and I don't see it for like the beauty that it might have on its own. My partner often has to be like, no, 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 before you put it there, let me look at it and I will decide whether or not it looks good. And bless him, he's like, nice enough to be like, oh yeah, this does look like shit, or be like, this looks good, it's just not what you had in mind, and those are two different things.
Look, I
um
I gotta say, and I mean, I you probably brought your nicest seconds, but your seconds are better than my firsts. These are your seconds are really nice dice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a second pile already going for
For
this
next
year's Big
year.
Bad Con.
Nice.
But because I used my nicest seconds in the first one, this one has a long
The ragged.
yeah,
This is a D5.
yeah, so people will really have to look through the pile to find their, money's worth this
Uh,
year.
so Well, first of all, if you want these fine dice, there's a link right there to Nonagon Dice, which is
Indeed.
fantastic. And you can get your own set, and I highly recommend you do. Although currently sold out, I noticed.
Yeah, but I have commissions open, so if you wanted like a custom set of dice to your
This is the problem. You have like
specifications,
8 jobs.
I know it's a problem. Oh,
You have like, and you've added game designer to your jobs. You made is it a solo RPG?
it's a two-player RPG, and I don't know if that necessarily qualifies me as a game designer. Honestly, it's like the
Have you
first
designed a
time.
game?
Yes,
Then you're a game designer.
I, I okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's a game called Up All Night, and it's a two-player role-playing game where you bargain with your brain to let you fall asleep. So it's a game about bargaining with your mind for one night's rest, and one person plays the person, and the other person like embodies the mind, and it's like this back and forth that you have.
I love it,
Um,
and so it's just a bargaining session. Like that's it.
yeah,
That's it.
it's. I am proud of what I was able to put out, and
I
I'm sure
so
it has its
I haven't
flaws.
read it yet, but I have it. I'm looking forward to, pulling it out. I don't know. My wife gets mad at me because I'm one of those people that as soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm asleep. So I don't think
Oh,
she wants to play that with me. I don't think so.
fair enough.
There's very little negotiating going on because I just go to sleep. You know, uh,
I envy you. That's great.
uh,
That
many
makes
people do. There's a simplicity in being dumb. You can just sort of,
Hey,
I am taken away on my cloud of not caring. That's
honestly, that's aspirational to me. So,
it. Yeah, well, and I want to make dice someday. I don't even know how. Like it's like, and I mean, you kind of undersold that because, to my understanding, like working with resin, I have another friend who makes beautiful dice. Hers are all bird based. So
who
she
is this
does
person?
bird.
Can I know about them?
I will
So,
totally connect you with Andrea.
yes.
She does birds of. It's called Birds of Paradise. Let me see. Do I have any Birds of Paradise here with me? But so she makes different sets of. Oh man, do I have any Birds of Paradise? I now that I stopped running games from my desk, I don't really have. But
What do you
so
guys
she
have?
makes all the different sets that are based on different kinds of birds and that sort of thing. And so she's got like, but so she made me a set of special dice just from because in one of my Call of Cthulhu games, I one of the things I hate about Call of Cthulhu is
Mm.
that the people who play it kind of self-select, and they all know everything in the game. And so you're like, this horrible eldritch beast, like, well, that's a shantank and it's got,
Right.
37
Yeah.
hit points. And, I'm like, no, it's a
Uh,
horrible eldritch. And so I don't ever describe anything by the book. I just make up something. And so I was running this game and I was like, it kind of looks like, a mangy parrot, but there's some shark in there. And so parrot shark became this whole thing. And so she made me parrot shark
Oh,
dice
I love
that are,
that.
let's see, do I have that are like multicolored? No, I don't have them in my bag. They're multicolored, but then they're also gray for the shark. It's um
That is so
but
cool.
so, she makes lovely dice. I will make sure to connect you with Andrea because
Yes.
she is the reason that I know, because she's told me that like resin is somewhat dangerous to deal with.
Yes, I was gonna, yeah. So when you pour resin, it is a toxic material. So you need to have safety comes first with resin. You need to have really well ventilated spaces. You need to be wearing a vapor mask that is rated for resin fumes. You need to be wearing nitrile free gloves, not latex, nitrile free gloves. Two different things. And making sure that you're performing like all safety procedures while using resin, because um, it is a toxic material, and over time you can build sensitivity to it if you don't take care of yourself when using it, because um like people have had like lung issues from it, they've
Mm.
had like skin issues from it. It can be a nasty thing. So
Is that the
yeah,
fumes? Is it from the?
it's not just the fumes. So once resin is mixed, like it's a two part epoxy, right? So like you mix part A and part B and at certain proportions, um and once they're mixed, it kicks off this chemical reaction, and it has like it's a and that process in itself releases fumes. And if it gets on your skin as well, that's also like, I don't know the specifics of why it's bad for you,
But it's bad.
but yeah, but it's bad for you, and it does pretty shitty things to your body. So yeah, touch, smell, all of those things not good. um so yeah, it you got to be safe when you're using it. And like,
I'm just blown away by like the the art and the you know the sort of the craft that goes into it too, that like makes these I mean, and the function of being able to not just make them beautiful, but also they wrote, you know, make them functional as dice, because there's, you know, there's some, I know, can you make loaded dice?
I somebody
You
actually
know,
offered
wait,
to
you
pay
know how
me
to
a
make
lot.
loaded dice?
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's a fairly like a loaded dice is just weighted on. I don't make them out of principle, but
I would, but
because,
so do you put more like pigment in one square or something? How do
well,
you
no. So you would, if you were, if I were to make loaded dice and it had to be
just
loaded to
say?
this, just say, here's the thing. Somebody offered to pay me money. They were like, "Can you make me loaded dice?" And I was like, "No," because here's the thing. I don't want to be the person you go to for loaded dice. And I don't want people like, because one of the things that dice makers deal with a lot, like handmade dice makers, is people just going, well, is it even balanced? And
Right,
just like
right.
asking you if your dice are balanced, or if they're like, what's interesting and a little bit annoying, and I'm gonna stand up for all my fellow dice makers over here, is that a lot of factory made dice that are not casino grade are often imbalanced, because say for example chesses, they're injection molded, right? So if you do like a cross section of a chessex opaque dice, you will see that it's riddled with bubbles, and
Hmm.
that's often what causes said imbalance. So there'll be like assholes who just use only chessex, and shout out to chessex, I love your dice, the lab dice are great.
Yeah,
But
Chessex is
um
lovely stuff.
there'll be people who exclusively use these and be like, well, I only like using
That's
balanced
right.
dice. I'm like, yeah, go away, those are also probably imbalanced. In fact, handmade dice are probably more balanced in this regard, because most professional handmade dice makers use something known as a pressure pot to compress the air bubbles in their dice so that there's no air bubbles within them,
Yeah, yeah, it's,
right? So,
you know, you'd figure that like taking longer to make the dice and not mass producing them would lead to better
better
made
dice,
dice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a principle, I don't make loaded dice because God, you know.
I well, so
But here's how
I
I would
didn't even
if I had
so
to.
I didn't even understand, and you know, make of that what you will. I didn't even understand the mechanic of how one would make a die loaded, and so that was interesting to me to sort of.
So here's the thing. Anytime you, if an object is completely comprised of the same material throughout, especially a die, like with a polygon with like, a certain set amount of sides, it is going to be balanced, because the weight of the material is consistent throughout. When you start introducing um uh you know pieces within the resin that are made of a different material, the density or the weight of the matter changes, and that's when there are slight imbalances, right? And not enough to it for it to really like affect your Dungeons and Dragons game. You wouldn't use it for casino grade stuff, but we're not saying that you can anyway.
Right.
But using, like, keeping that in mind, to make a weighted dice, you would just have to use something that significantly tilts the balance to one side of the die. And the way you would do that, or at least I would think about doing that, is um use opaque resin. Like, just make sure it's like completely opaque and not see through at all. And on the face that and make a specific mold with the face that I want the weight to lean towards on the bottom. So if it's a top down mold and I want it to be leaning towards 20, the 20 would be at the bottom of the mold. And I would place a little bit of that opaque resin in there, put some, like, I don't know, fucking stones or just whatever that adds weight to that side under that layer of resin, and then cover the rest of it with the lighter
Right.
materials, which is the
Wow.
epoxy
That's.
resin.
I
And once
mean,
it cures, ideally, it will be weighted. Um, you didn't hear that here, folks.
so the mechanics. So I'm fascinated by anybody who makes things. I think making
Me too.
things is a super cool thing, and and I mean, GMing is making things, but like making things with your hands is a whole nother level. As you're like kind of. I know some people don't like the term craft, but like
I like
sort of
it.
crafting things is just super. I wish that I had any sort of skill in that area, but all right, well, you have been so generous with your time. I want to, and for some reason, so we're recording this at night my time, early in morning your time, but
Yes.
I'm fascinated by the fact that somewhere between you and I there's a 30-minute time zone.
Yes, there
Because
is.
where like that's is I've never heard of a 30-minute time zone before.
I get this a lot, but I mean, I've always grown up in GMT plus 5:30, so it was always normal to me. And I've had a lot of like friends from the States be like, a half an hour time difference. That's wild. I'm like, I guess I
It's
don't know where
very
it comes
strange.
from, but
For us,
interesting.
it's super strange. How many? I mean, I'm
I think like
time
what,
zone.
10.5 hours, maybe. I think.
I want someday. There was a day in America where they made all of the time zones standard. And the way they did it was there was a train that went from station to station, and it was timed exactly so that when this train got there, it was this time. And that would be what
Right.
time. And so I really want to run a game that like that train is some sort of weird like ceremony that when it reaches the final station the world will end, and so you have to stop the
Oh,
this
race against time. That's what you should
yeah,
call it.
but so I time zones have always like I think they're kind
Yeah,
of weird and strange,
time
and
is a weird soup. It's
it
it's
really is. It really is. That's a great way to put it. Uh,
yeah.
so we end every episode with the same couple of questions.
Okay.
So, what is your favorite system to run?
My favorite system to run. Hmm. I think it's Dungeons and
Yeah, okay,
Dragons.
yeah, no, that's a perfectly fine answer.
Yeah.
What is a system you
Oh,
haven't
actually,
run?
no, no, no. I changed my
Nope.
mind. It's powered by the apocalypse. I love running stuff like
Oh, nice.
masks
I mean,
or
is there a
monster
specific
hearts.
one that you really like, or kind of
Yeah,
the
I really
whole
like masks.
mass is
Running masks
fantastic?
is fun. Yeah. Yeah.
I had Mo on, and we talked all sorts of Powered by the Apocalypse, and she
Mo
actually
is
has
wonderful.
a database of every PBTA
Yes.
game. It's like 300 something. It's ridiculous. She's got a whole list.
I've heard about this legendary spreadsheet of hers.
It's astounding. So, what is a system you haven't run that you would like to run?
A system that I haven't run that I want to run. I am very curious about running. I talked about this earlier, dialect, but I'm also very curious about running the Expanse RPG system. I think Green Ronin has their own
Yeah, yeah.
D6 based.
Is that a what is the? I'm trying to remember the system on that one. I haven't.
I don't know what the system is called. It's the same one that Green Ronin uses in like the Witcher RPG as
Yeah,
well. Uh,
yeah.
but that one, whatever it is.
I was a big fan of I love hard sci-fi would be, although it would be interesting to RPG to role play hard sci-fi, because uh I'm always terrified of running the game where the guy's like, well, actually, the Sherman tank's armor to the left was, and so I don't run like World War II games or anything like that because there's always
Right.
going to be that guy. Uh, but like, and so I'd be worried in the Expanse, be like, well, light doesn't bend that way at the speed of,
I think uh, I think if that's the only thing stopping you, use a fucking like set the expectation beforehand. Be like, listen, you're coming into this table. There we are not playing a scientifically accurate game. Like what people live on the moon, that's already not scientifically accurate. All right, get over yourself. Light bends
I
this way if
love
I
it.
say
That's
so.
a great way
Yeah.
to put it. Uh,
Yeah.
so Last, it's the Space Jam question. Martians have invaded the planet. They
Okay.
will destroy the Earth, the place where I keep all of my stuff, unless you, Indrani Ganguly, run a massively entertaining 4-hour game for them. What are you running? And why?
So there's a hag who's stolen a bunch of games.
That is called reincorporation, people, and it is always funny. That is outstanding.
um,
That is out. Yeah, you don't have to answer anything more. You've saved Earth just by that. That was fantastic.
yeah, well, there you go.
You're the
Tried and true, always works.
reincorporation is it never fails.
Yeah.
You're the first person to like actually make that work. That was a classic bit. My gosh.
Thank you. I love a good reincorporation.
Well, friends, you can find Indrani at there's several places there. You can find her at Nonagon Dice on Twitter.
Twitter, Instagram, whatever your platform
those,
of choice is.
all those social media things. You don't have to live in India to be part of the Daisies and Dragons community.
Correct.
And
yes,
and it is an awesome place to for people like me to experience gamers that have a totally different life than I do.
and collaborate with folks
I
from
know.
across the world.
Look, I'm gonna make this guarantee. I'm gonna run a game on Daisies and Dragons. I'm gonna
hold you to that.
I'll run like a 4-hour paranoia game on Daisies and Dragons.
Do it.
That will be fascinating and not at all cause an international incident, I'm sure.
That'll be fine.
But you can too, is what I'm saying. Like you running games on Discord is super easy and is kind of where the world is now. But you don't have, so you can join that community and what's one more Discord? Come on, you're on 37 already.
Yeah.
Just join another, and it's an awesome community. And one thing that's not on here, where can people find your RPG?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, if my game is called Up All Night, it's on itch.io/Indrani. If you go there, you'll be able to find it. It's free. It's pay what you want, so just pick it up if you want to try it out.
The phrase "Up All Night" has been ruined for me because in the 80s, I don't know. Maybe India doesn't have this, but we had a thing called USA Up All Night, which was like one of our cable channels. And they would show really bad, like soft core porn movies.
That's fucking
like
funny.
like Porky's or something, where just these dumb comedies that would be like, look, okay, we know the movie sucks, but here's some boobs, and
I'd watch that, yeah.
And USA Up All Night would show these, and they would have bits in between that Gilbert Gottfried would host.
Who is that?
Gilbert Gottfried. He was the parrot in Aladdin. He was.
Oh, love it.
He's got a terrible voice, But he would do these little comedy bits between them. And 12-year-old me, like bad movies, boobs, and Gilbert Gottfried. I would watch that. That was all night for me.
That sounds much more fun than my game. Go do that.
I doubt that. But so you can grab Up All Night at that itch.io. Nothing makes me sound older than trying to say things like itch.io.
Yeah. I don't even know. Some people say it's itch.io, it's itch.io, whatever you want to call it.
I don't think itch.io is going to stick. I don't know. That sounds like a really...
I've heard people like fight me. I'll be like, oh, itch.io. I'm like, what?
itch.io. That sounds like a horrible off-brand product.
I know. It sounds like, I don't know, like cream that you put
on. Yeah,
like,
some really bad. Thanks, itch.io.
Sponsored by Itchy.
Yeah, brought to you by Itch.io.
Yeah. So go play the game. I let me know what you think.
I've already seen you've gotten some really great feedback online. People have been enjoying it and trying it out. I think that's super cool. That's a really interesting thing, like that immediate feedback loop of social media of like, I just played your game and this happened.
so gratifying. Like even if it's bad, it's like, oh, someone played it or someone read it. Like, whoa, that's that in and of itself is great. And it's also terrifying. Like putting it out there, like making it like put it up as like pay what you want or pick it up for free because I was like, I don't see why anybody would pay money for this. And the fact that like people have like actually like paid to pick up the game even though they didn't really have to makes me go, what, why would you do that? And then like those people coming and being like, oh, I actually enjoyed reading it and I'm excited to play it, or I played it and it's fun. I was like, this is weird. This like it feels like this cosmic joke that everybody else is in on and the game actually sucks and blah blah blah. And but yeah, social media is a fun beast that way, like so
I
much
wish
social
more of my
interaction.
cosmic jokes involved people paying me.
I
Most of
know.
most of
I
my
know. I
cosmic
sound like
jokes
such a yeah. The it's
that is,
well,
if you're gonna have imposter syndrome, at least have imposter syndrome that pays.
yeah. Yeah. I was telling Shubham, like, Shubham, I don't know why people are saying nice things. And he's like, Inani, this this is the best kind of imposter syndrome. I'm like, okay.
It is. Well, Indrani, thank you so much. I am super excited to see you again and to eat cookies that will try and kill me at Big
Yes.
Bad Con. She brought
I love that you called
snacks.
Bhakarwadi
She brought.
cookies. And
We had several. We were lucky enough to have several guests from India at Big Bad Con
Mhm.
this year, and they brought a panoply of snacks from India that were wonderful. But one of them in particular was this weird. Um, it wasn't a cookie because it was cut into strips kind of, but it was
uh-huh.
like it tasted like a cinnamon cookie that then tried to kill you because it suddenly got very spicy at the end.
Was it the thing that looked like a tiny cinnamon roll?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bhakarwadi. It's I love that you call it a cookie. Yes. But I I made sure to like lay it out in terms of spice tolerance
You
for
did. You
people.
were very
Nice.
there were multiple warnings about what is it. And the funny thing is that was in the not so spicy area.
Yeah. It was in the like it's kind of spicy, but I think you'll be okay. But I guess it didn't work
I
for
always
you.
tell a story. My brother used to live in Munich, and we would go to this Indian restaurant there, and they had three levels of spice at this restaurant.
Mhm.
One was German spicy, which was not spicy at all because they don't like spicy food. Then there was American spicy that was, a little spicy.
Yeah.
And then there was Indian spicy that they would not let you order. And
That's really funny.
my brother was like adamant. He's like, I've been to India. I love spicy food. I want, and they're like, okay. And then he couldn't eat it. It was just,
I mean,
I'm
yeah,
pretty
I've
sure they
heard that.
loaded everything they could in there just to be like, well, all right, we'll show you, stupid American.
God, I hope they're not that petty. There's
I
this
hope they
great
are. That was
there's a great Trevor Noah bit from his new special. It's called I Wish You Would. I think it's on Netflix. And he does this whole bit about going to an Indian restaurant with his friends. And it's one of my favorite things to watch. So if you have the time, go check it out.
I'll check it out. Look, so friends, you've gotten how to load dice. You've gotten Netflix recommendations. Well, this episode has had it all. I don't know how we can go on, and so I think. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I'm really bad at saying goodnight. So I'm gonna end this episode now. Find Indrani at all of these awesome locations, and if you are lucky enough to go to Big Bad Con, uh, look for her dice painting sessions because it's
Yes.
awesome. I learned several things and like just like the sense of community at that table was beautiful. It was like a little kind of bringing everybody together. And, I had across from me some guys from Mexico City, and, next to me
Tomas.
was another woman from India. And we were just shooting the breeze while we were painting dice. And it was just a really cool moment that I just really appreciated. It was a
Um,
nice sort of decompress from the
that
con.
was the intention. I'm glad that it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was nervous to do it, but I'm glad it worked.
And I
Yeah.
still haven't said goodnight. So goodbye, internet friends.
Bye.